The transatlantic slave trade was a terrible time in history. From 1600 to 1800, many Africans were taken from their homes. They were sent across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas. There they were made to be slaves. At first, Europeans went to Africa for other reasons. They wanted gold and ivory, which were very valuable. European countries saw a chance in the Americas. Big farms needed workers. Sugar, tobacco and cotton were crops that made a lot of money, but these crops needed lots of workers. Africans became the answer. People saw them as cheap workers. This change was important. Africans were no longer trade partners. They became like things to be bought and sold. The need for slaves grew quickly. European traders wanted more people to enslave. This made slavery a bigger business, even within Africa. The slave trade hurt Africa badly. Many people died. It changed societies in terrible ways. During this time, some African empires became very powerful. These empires fought wars. They captured people from other groups and sold them to European traders. This trade made the empires rich, but it also caused more fighting and problems. The transatlantic slave trade was complicated. It needed people working together. African leaders were a big part of it. They joined the trade for their own reasons. Some wanted things from Europe. Others wanted to stay in power. African leaders had different reasons. Some saw the trade as a way to get rich. Things from Europe, like guns and cloth, were very popular. These things could make them stronger than their enemies. Other African leaders felt they had no choice. They joined the trade to protect their people. They were afraid of Europe's power. They thought working with Europeans was the best way to avoid war. This cooperation had terrible results. It led to millions of people becoming slaves. The slave trade hurt African societies. It made people not trust each other. It caused more fighting. It made people afraid. This history of bad treatment continued to hurt Africa for a long time. The transatlantic slave trade became a worldwide business. European countries fought to control it. Britain became the most powerful. By the 1700s, it controlled most of the trade. Britain was so powerful for a few reasons. It had a strong navy, which controlled the sea routes. It also had a growing economy, which meant people wanted the things made by enslaved Africans. British cities like Liverpool and Bristol made a lot of money from the trade. The transatlantic slave trade worked like a triangle. This helped European traders make the most money. First, ships went from Europe to Africa with goods. These goods were traded for enslaved Africans. Second, the enslaved Africans were taken across the Atlantic. The trip was horrible. Many died. Lastly, goods made by slaves were taken back to Europe. These goods included sugar, tobacco, and cotton. This system made European countries, especially Britain, very rich. The Middle Passage was the worst part of the transatlantic slave trade. It was the journey of enslaved Africans across the Atlantic Ocean. Life on the slave ships was awful. Millions died. Enslaved Africans were crammed into the bottom of the ships. There was little air or light. Sickness spread quickly. Many people died. Those who lived arrived in the Americas scared and feeling less than human. The Middle Passage showed how cruel people could be. It showed how terrible the slave trade was. The conditions on the ships were meant to make the most money. The slave traders didn't care about the enslaved Africans. People who wanted to end slavery used stories about the Middle Passage to show how bad the trade was. These stories shocked many Europeans. They helped to start the movement to end slavery. The movement to end slavery grew stronger in the late 1700s. People from all walks of life came together. They said the slave trade was a terrible thing. They wanted it to stop. People who made money from slavery fought hard to keep it, but things were changing. People started to think slavery was wrong. In 1807, Britain ended the slave trade. Key figures like William Wilberforce and Olaudah Equiano played crucial roles. Ending the slave trade was a huge moment. It was a turning point in the fight for human rights. But the effects of slavery lasted a long time. The trade hurt Africa very badly. The transatlantic slave trade was a terrible tragedy. Departure points like Mombasa in East Africa and Liberia in West Africa were heavily impacted. Millions of Africans were taken from their homes. They were treated very cruelly. We must never forget what happened. It reminds us of the dangers of racism and greed. It reminds us to keep fighting for fairness and equality.